Hi everybody, it's Aggie and welcome to another Thursday video. Today's video was designed especially for professionals who work with interpreters. It's aimed at solicitors, barristers, judges, doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, and anyone who ever has to use an interpreter in a public service or community setting. These 5 easy tips were designed based on 10 years of my working experience as an interpreter in different settings and different modes. They are universal, so you can use them in any situation, and they are there to support you to get the best outcome of those conversations or meetings where you are relying on an interpreter for communication. Let's get into those. Tip number 1, speaking directly to your service user, patient or client. This is the first tip that I want to give you, and it's the most important one out of all 5. Speaking directly to the non-English or limited English speaker using their name is the key to great communication via an interpreter. There are 5 reasons for why that's the case. Number 1, it's a mark of respect. The person may not speak English, but it's their conversation and the conversation is about them. They might feel disempowered or excluded when the professional is addressing the interpreter and saying, "Can you ask them to give me that?" or "Can you tell them to give me some information?" Second reason is brevity. It takes a lot less time to say, "Where is the pain located?" rather than saying, "Interpreter, can you ask her where the pain is located?" Another consideration is clarity. This is especially important in situations where the exchange is between the professional and the service user, but other people may be also mentioned. One of the most extreme examples was when a witness was giving evidence and the witness was male, the defendant was male, a friend who came to the witness's aid was also male. So it was an absolute nightmare to try to make out what was being referred to when the police officer was saying he. Completely avoid using he or she and always use you. Communication is not just about words, and interpreting in public service and community also includes other factors such as body language, facial expression, and posture. If we are looking at the interpreter and trying to get a conversation with them, we are missing those vital channels of information such as how the person is reacting, whether they are smiling, what they are communicating with the body language. So this is extremely important for overall communication, to have access to all of those non-verbal forms of communication. It's a common misconception that if someone doesn't speak English, they don't understand English, but in fact, passive understanding precedes the ability to communicate orally. Even if someone is sitting there listening to the interpretation, they are not just a completely excluded party. They probably understand quite a lot of what is being said, especially if the topic has been well known to them. So listening to the professional addressing them directly and then having it repeated by an interpreter can strengthen that relationship of trust and can help to develop rapport, which is extremely beneficial and valuable in the longer run. If you have that relationship built up with the service user, this will greatly contribute to the successful outcome of whatever engagement you have with the service user or client. Tip number 2, if you can, brief us in advance. Now, when I say brief, I don't mean sitting down for 15 minutes. Even a 1-sentence briefing such as, "This client is known to be volatile," or "This client is about to get some real unpleasant news," or "The purpose of this appointment is to gather information." This helps us greatly because it allows us to put ourselves in the right mindset for the conversation ahead. Communication styles are adapted to certain situations. Interpreting should also be slightly mirrored in that fashion. So if it's something extremely upsetting, it's good to know to be sympathetic. Also, for the benefit of the interpreters themselves, who are also living, breathing people with emotions, it's really valuable for us to know that something that we might hear is extremely graphic. There is some sexual content, something very upsetting, or something that may elicit a reaction from us. It's good for us to know and prepare ourselves in advance. Tip number 3, it might be tempting when you have an interpreter and a list of questions to ask to just give them all of the questions and have them ask those one by one. But it's important to remember that interpreting is stressful, not just for someone like yourself, for example, if you've never used our services, or for the interpreters themselves if it's something high stakes. But also having to use an interpreter can be stressful and embarrassing for people who, in my case, are mostly adults, people with social standing, people with careers, and for them not being able to communicate freely can be quite embarrassing. So if they are barraged with a list of questions, first of all, won't remember all of them. They may only answer part of them, one question at a time, wait for the answer and proceed. I am aware that it takes more time, but also it's going to be a lot more successful and reliable. Tip number 4, if the service user needs to take something away from the meeting, have them write it down or encourage the interpreter to write it down for them. The most extreme example of giving a lot of information at once was when a service user was told to contact multiple organizations, check emails, make phone calls, fill out forms, and I encouraged the social worker to allow me to write it down, and the list was this size when I finished. There was no way that the service user would remember all of that. Also, for people who have just received a sentence, it's important to know what they are expected to do. I have come across many service users who would leave the courtroom with the rabbit in the headlights kind of a look, being completely overwhelmed, overcome with emotion and stress, and they would turn to me and say, what do I need to do next? So what I usually do is I ask the probation officer or someone from the court staff to just hang around for a moment and just write everything down for that person, including the details on how to pay fines, the length of disqualification, etc., so that they have that information, because in that state of emotion they probably wouldn't be able to remember it clearly. Tip number 5, scheduling. The back and forth, utterance by utterance mode, which we call consecutive mode, does take more time, and there is no way around it. So adding 50% of what the conversation would normally take is a good way to make sure that you have enough time for questions, clarifications, noting things down, and covering everything that you need to cover without the interpreter having to dash off to another appointment. To summarize my 5 top tips for working with interpreters in public service setting. Number 1, speak directly to the person, your client, your service user, or your patient, using their name instead of saying he or she. Number 2, brief the interpreter in advance, tell them about the desired outcome of the conversation, warn them in advance if there is some upsetting content. Number 3, ask one question at a time, try not to overwhelm the patient or service user with many questions all at once. Number 4, get the interpreter to write down the most important points to take away in the target language, or encourage the service user or patient to do it for themselves. Number 5, when you schedule the appointment with an interpreter, remember that things will take more time. Maybe a good rule of thumb is 25 to 50% more time. So a 1-hour appointment becomes hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half appointment. Thank you so much for watching. I hope my tips are going to be helpful and they will empower you and support you to get the best outcomes when working with public service interpreters in legal, medical and social work settings. If you have any questions or suggestions, any issues that you would like to share with me, please let me know in the comments or email me. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your perspective and your take on things. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.